Okay then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I guess we got going.
Okay. Well, I'll introduce you and then you can get going.
All right.
All right. So welcome everybody to GAMEtalk. As you know, I am your librarian, Michelle Goodrich, and I am pleased to have our second and final guest for this semester. You'll see that we've got Matt Paquette joining us today. Welcome. I'm going to read Matt's bio that he's provided, and then we'll let him get started. So Matt is a graphic designer with over 20 years of experience, and he spent most of the last decade honing his skills at the museums in his hometown, Ottawa, Ontario, before making the jump to tabletop games. Now with over 40 board game credits to his name, Matt is one of the most sought-after graphic designers in the industry. Matt is known for his penchant for typography and lettering. He strives to create strong identity and brand consistency in his work. Despite his busy schedule, Matt still finds time to partake in weekly D&D campaign and cut a rug on the dance floor. I do want to see dance moves later. Matt will always make time for swing dancing. Swing dancing it is. Okay, so thank you so much for being here, Matt, and take it away.
All right, thanks. You can thank Sen for that bio, by the way.
Seems very Sen.
Yeah, doesn't it? Okay, cool. Well, hi, everybody. I'm just going to go right into my PowerPoint presentation. So you're going to be deprived of this lovely face. So just give me one sec. Share screen.
You never know, we might still be able to see you.
I shared the wrong screen. Darn. Look at that. Stop share. Let's try this again. Really, I've done this before.
I found that Zoom likes to throw the windows in different places than you expect it to.
Well, it doesn't help when you have 3 monitors either. Okay, so you can see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yep. All right. Hi, everybody. Michelle, thanks for the great intro. And thanks for having me today. Like she said, my name is Matt Paquette. I've been a graphic designer for quite a while, 20 years or so. And these days, I'm running a small little boutique agency here in Ottawa. It's me and a couple other people, plus a few others that float in from time to time, depending on our workload. I went to school originally here in Ottawa at Algonquin College for computer programming, believe it or not. But every job that I worked at over the years, I tried to find more and more creative things to do in it. So eventually I just kind of looked for creative jobs. I think the first full-time designer job I had was working at Alcatel-Lucent, a high-tech firm in Canada, suburb here, and as a marketing communications graphic designer. And that was pretty fun. Got a lot of high tech is always fun to do for graphic design. And then from there, I moved on to the Bank of Canada Museum. And that was really neat. That I kind of got my start in game design and working on games at the museum. I was there for about 7 years. And during that time, I got to work on some really fantastic exhibitions. And, you know, one of the things that I kind of had to learn when you're working on as an exhibition and graphic designer, the learning curve is pretty steep, because you got to figure out how people are going to be interacting with things. And especially when it comes to museum, you have thousands of people coming through using these exhibitions all the time. So things like material selection and thinking about what kind of durability one material is going to have over another. So a lot of that really fed into what I do these days, trying to figure out how games are going to last as long as they possibly can without looking like like crap at the end of the day or end of the year. You have them after about 3 or 4 plays and things like that. So that was my time at the museum. During my time, I ended it with creating 2 games. One was like a roll and move type game that helped you that helped students. A lot of the people that played the games were like high school students and grade school students. So we had to, for every game we built, it had to be actually service different levels of comprehension from grade school to high school. And most of the time that would involve like using different information sets to have a different gameplay experience depending on the age of the person. So the first one was like a roll and move, how to manage your money with like debit and credit and things like that. It was pretty simple. And then there's another one that was based on creating the blockchain for like a Bitcoin type thing. And that was a group activity. 30 people, I think, it played. And it was more of a question and answer type thing where the answers would build this blockchain of numbers and letters, the kind of thing. So those were kind of like the last 2 things I worked on there, which were games, which was kind of neat. And after about 7 or 8 years at the museum, I had been working in the game industry for a couple of years on the side, and it was time for me to kind of pursue this full time. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's kind of go back a couple of years and talk about how I got into the industry. I was working with a buddy at the museum, and he was a board gamer, a modern board gamer, and he invited me over for a game day. And I'd played D&D as a kid and other games like Talisman and things like that. And I was like, I was a little leery, so I kind of turned him down the first time. He asked me again about a month later. I said sure. So I went to his place. After 12 hours of gaming, I went home and I learned about 7 or 8 games, and my mind was just mush, but I was kind of hooked. So I started collecting. Yeah, I think my first modern game that I collected was King of Tokyo, and I started collecting other games. And then as I was, being who I am and liking to make things, I started making player aids for the games that I did have. So I made a player board for Boss Monster, some money wallets for Power Grid, and a whole bunch of other things. So I really had a lot of fun doing that. And then I thought to myself, well, what if I can do this? What if I could do this as a living or even as, to make money on the side? So I kind of put my thinking cap on for that for a while. Came up with about a list of 40 or 50 publishers that I wanted to work with. And thought about how the best way to go about approaching these folks would be. So I had my portfolio website at the time. I made a page that kind of put together all the things as close to game design as I had in my portfolio to kind of make a page that I could send people to in the industry. And then I went through all of the different companies, looked at all the different games that they had, what they had to offer, what their presence was like from a branding perspective, and then identified the ones I really wanted to work with. So I ended up creating an email and sending cold email, 30 or 40 cold emails out to all of these people. And as any of those campaigns go, it's the 100-10-1 rule. For every 100 emails you send out, you might get 10 bites and maybe land 1 job out of it. Well, for me, it was a little better odds than that. I ended up sending 30 or 40 out. I got a few bites, but I ended up landing a job, which was great. It was a small job, but it was a job nonetheless. Todd from AEG reached out to me while I was at a typography convention in our conference in Denver, saying that, hey, we have a game we're working on called Grove Tenders by John D. Clare, and it's got this really great new mechanism that hasn't been done before, and we're looking for some card backs for it. So I ended up doing 4 different card backs, one for each player, because they kind of wanted the different elements and stuff. And then in the end, the game came out. It ended up being called Mystic Veil. So the green and brown card you see on the screen now was then the one they ended up going with, and they kind of, which happens sometimes, they didn't use the other 3 designs, but they just color shifted that one design for each of the different players. And that was the beginning of a long relationship, and it's still an ongoing relationship with AEG, and such fantastic guys there. And I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of work with them. So that's kind of how I, got my start working with the actual publishers in the industry. So that was kind of, I was surprised that it went so smoothly, and well, it took a while, but I was pretty happy about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what my company, Matt Paquette Co., does in the industry. So the crux of what we do mainly is graphic design and user experience design. But when it comes to board games, I like to call it player experience, because it's more than just how well the person's able to use the product. It's how, when it comes to playing a game, how enjoyable is that experience? And I think graphic design and what we do as a company leads a lot to that as well. The main components of that are like component layout, user experience design, and making sure you organize things and bits of information in a way that is hierarchically makes sense. So the most important piece of information is the thing that's communicated first, and it's the most obvious, kind of the most prominent on the page, and then second most, second, and so on and so forth. Another part of what we do is type selection. As board gamers are, don't always play in this, brilliantly lit, well lit kitchens. I know I play every Sunday. I used to play every Sunday night in the before times at a pub, and there certainly isn't great lighting there. So type selection is a big deal. You want to make sure that no matter what the environment, you're not being hindered by the font that you're using, in order for your players to be able to understand or comprehend quickly what's going on. And then lastly, for this little area, accessibility plays a big role. So there's a couple of different facets to that. There's a lot, you're going to hear people talk about double and triple coding. So that's like an example of that is if you have, like in not tiny towns, in Ticket to Ride, all of the cards have colors to the train cards, but they also have little icons too. So that's a double coded thing where you can actually, if you have color issues and you can't tell one color apart from another, then you can use these icons to tell apart the different types of cards. So that's like a visual deficiency. There's also accessibility issues around coordination and dexterity and fine motor skills. So if, paying attention to how you make the bits of the game so that they're not too hard to create or to pick up, like, adding an extra millimeter height to your tiles so that they're just that much easier to grab up off the table. Not everybody's playing on a surface that has like the poker surface where you can have, you just push it down and it ends up easily coming up. Sometimes you're playing on just hardwood surface, and getting a card off of those tables sometimes is a real pain. So that's kind of wrapping up the core of what we do. Lately though, I've been trying to really talk to a lot of customers and clients about expanding the role that we play in how they develop their games. And one of the things that I think is really important is bringing us on a little more early in the process, so that we can help with things like prototype iteration. So the way it usually works now is the game designer will get the beginning of the game going, and then once they've got a solid concept, they pitch it to a publisher. Or it's one of the ways it could go anyways. Pitch it to a publisher. Publishers, yeah, great, let's sign it. They continue to develop the game, and then when they get it to a point where they stop developing or mostly stop developing, they'll bring on a graphic designer and an artist. Maybe the graphic designer, by the time they start, they'll have a couple of pieces of art already done to develop the style of the game. So that's kind of the typically way it's done. And then the graphic designer kind of takes the ball from there to the finish line with the developer and the game designer, possibly. But if you bring us on a little more early in the process, we're able to work with the game designer, with the developers, to organically iterate the prototypes so that we can address things like placement of component items, so that bits of information, so that UX issues are addressed early on. You know, we're not necessarily going to sit down and design the actual components, but we'll do stuff like make recommendations of what hierarchy the bits of information should take, where maybe to place things, and so on and so forth, so that by the time the game is done being developed, all of that UX stuff has already been taken care of. So really all you need to do now is finish up the art and skin it. You don't need to find the best place to put this bit of information or this icon or what shape this thing is going to be, or materials. All of that's already been taken care of because you've organically grown this product from the get-go. Another part of the services that we offer is branding and positioning and strategy. So this is on a couple of different levels. On the top level, you're talking about, corporate branding for publishers, for some game designers, for some other industry adjacent companies as well, like crowdfunding or logistics or fulfillment people. But let's talk about publishers for a second. So we got there's corporate branding. You want to go logo, style guide, how they do their trade show materials, all that kind of stuff. And then a lot of the strategic stuff as well, like positioning. How do they want to position themselves in the minds of their customers and whatnot. So kind of tied to that is once they have their corporate identity kind of settled, and they have a style guide for that, there's something called trade dress that applies to basically everything that's customer facing. Box covers, trade show materials, advertising, any of that stuff. So a trade dress service that we could offer, or what that would kind of look like, would be to develop a style guide to say, okay, every single game you're going to produce is going to be in one of these 3 boxes, these sizes, and these orientations. So the logo is always going to go here. The game designers' names are always going to go here, and so on and so forth. So that, because in this industry, publishers are going to work with a lot of different graphic designers, unless they have their own in-house. Like, you get people like Red Raven Games. It's all Ryan Lockett. It's just him. So, but other companies, larger companies like AEG or CMON or whoever it is, they're going to work with graphic designers, different graphic designers for possibly every game they make. If they have a style guide that they can give the designer to say, okay, great, let's take some of the the guesswork out of it. Here's our style guide. This is how the box needs to be made. Awesome. One less thing they have to worry about, because whenever you're making a game, there's plenty of stuff apart from that to worry about. So that kind of touches upon the trade dress kind of things. And then there's also all the trade show material stuff. Like I did last year at Gen Con, I did the AEG booth, which it was a 40 by 60 foot booth that they rebranded every single day of the 4-day con, which was amazing. It had 14-foot walls. It was ridiculous. It was so much fun. Then lastly, the last thing we kind of offer is some support for crowdfunding. Kickstarter is a big deal when it comes to getting your board game to market, especially if you're self-publishing. It's such an easy way to, or a barrier-free way anyways, to to get your game to product or to market. So in doing some research, I found out that board games actually comprise about 1/3 of all of Kickstarter's revenue, which is ridiculous. In the last 2 years, I think we've done 15 to 20 Kickstarter campaigns. Some of them were small, some of them were 120-hour hours worth of work that we put into campaigns like Wonderland's War, or one that we just did, Merchants of the Dark Road by Elf Creek Games. So, in addition to kind of just designing the page, we can help out with creating the teaser video or writing the script for the whole thing, the dialogue, doing ads and whatnot. So that kind of rounds out all the services that we do. And I'm just going to keep talking, and then at the end we can go back and chat about things. So I'm going to get into now. I did a talk in March, just before COVID, just as COVID was kind of setting in. The day I got back from Reno at the Gamma trade show, the day I got back from Reno, the airport's closed. And this next little bit is parts of a talk that I gave in Reno. It was all about working with a graphic designer, what you should be expecting when you're working with a graphic designer. And this kind of goes both ways. If you're going to be on the design side, what you should be offering kind of as well. So I want to talk about roles for a sec. When you're at a party and you introduce yourself to somebody and you're just like, hey, my name is Matt, nice to meet you. The next question that comes out of their mouth a lot of the time is, oh, Matt, what do you do? I'm a dentist, I'm a lawyer, I'm a, circus clown, whatever it is. A lot of people define themselves by the roles, and the board game industry is no different. You look at the back couple of pages of the rule book, and you're going to see all the different roles there. There's two roles in particular I wanted to talk about. Two roles that often get kind of lumped together, and that is the graphic designer and the artist or illustrator. In my mind, they're two very different roles. So on one side, we have the graphic designer, and on the other side, we have the artist or the illustrator. The graphic designer, their main drive, their main objective is to take a very objective approach. Like what factual things need to be done here in order for me to communicate this information on this component to the player. The artist, it's a very subjective thing. They want to kind of elicit emotions and set the theme based on, they've been given a theme based from the game designer or the developer, and they really want to create that thematic bond between the player and the world, whether it's medieval Japan or an asteroid belt in outer space, whatever it is. Graphic designers, we tend to look at every single thing we're doing in the game as a problem to solve. How am I gonna, when this card is on the table and everybody needs to see it, how am I gonna make that happen? So that the text is legible from both sides of the table, whatever it is, whatever the problem is to solve, that's kind of the biggest kind of driver for us. Versus like an artist is more on the expressionism and kind of trying to really get a feeling out of you or drive that sense of emotion and visual connection that you're going to make to the character, to the scene, or whatever it is. As a result of what I do, if I do my job well, it's going to trigger understanding. They pick up a card, the card tells them to do something. The faster they can do that means the better I did my job. So flip over to the artist, they do their job well, it's going to ramp up that immersion level. It's sure they're reading the card, but as they're reading the card, if they're in a barren frozen wasteland and it's really kind of selling it through the visuals of the card, all the much better to really kind of set them into that world. And I'm going to be driven by gameplay, because at the end of the day, if it looks great, but there are hurdles because of the graphic design, because the information isn't being communicated very well, that's a problem. So gameplay, keeping gameplay flowing forward in a fluid manner is very important. And just as important is the emotions that you take along with you on the artist side. You know, as you're playing this game, they want this, you know, like, oh my God, look at this card, it's so cool, and stuff like that. So those are the main two differences between two roles that I find get confused. Not confused, but lumped together in the industry. So, you know, looking at the graphic designers, I tried to break it down. When I did my talk, I thought, well, what do I offer as a graphic designer in the industry? And I wrote a whole bunch of things down, and they seem to fall into some very specific silos. So I'm going to approach those in sort of the different personas that a graphic designer might have that you might be working with. So there's basically 5 different personas that I came across, or that I kind of lumped everything into. There's a communicator, there's the action hero, and that's talking about more like how do they act professionally versus non-professionally. The evil genius, what kind of stuff do they know? The passionate one, how do they put that passion to work for them? And then the wonderkin, what's that X factor that they're offering? So the basis of every relationship, whether it's professional or personal, is communication. How good are they at communicating with you, and you with them? You know, a continuous, fluid, two-way road of communication is really going to, you know, pave the way to no big surprises, no big, huge deadline issues. Things are just going to go smoothly, much more smoothly than they would have if you're having communication issues, of course. You know, and there's a few different things. Like, so think about the last time you worked with somebody in like a client customer service provider kind of relationship. When you were talking to them, or when you were listening to them, depending on which side of the table you were on, you know, were they listening to you? And were they asking questions to show comprehension of what you were talking about, or to get a better understanding of what your needs are? Were they too quick to reply, cutting you off and really showing that they weren't listening? And do they keep in touch to try and make sure that that communication highway is still, you know, in full force? So if you've answered no to at least one of those questions, you know, chances are the relationship could have used a little bit better communication. So, I mean, one of the worst things in the world is to have bad communication for a project, because it's the base for everything. And if you don't start off on a good foot there, then bad things can happen. Let's take a look at the action hero. This is so like when you're working with a designer or service provider of any kind of sort, how do they comport themselves when they're working, when you're in meetings with them, when you're working together? Is it in a professional manner? Do they do it in a way that gives you the assumption that they act just as professionally when you're not there? You know, that's important, because when they're talking to other people about working with you, you want to get that sense that they're going to have just as much of a demeanor, of a professional demeanor, as they do when they're face to face with you. You know, and there's some basic things about some basic flags that really kind of stand out for me for how professional, or just, you know, give me a good feeling about a relationship and about how professional the person I'm dealing with are they transparent with me? You know, are they hiding anything from me? I try not to hide anything from my clients, or I try to be as honest as I can. The language that they use with you, is it like too complex? Do they use unnecessary jargon? to try and puff their chest out at the expense of you understanding what they're talking about, rather than using language that everybody at the table can understand to illustrate whatever the issues are. I think FaceTime is a very important thing, especially in the days of COVID, even, just as much as before, but now that we're not leaving our house for a lot of the time, pick up the phone, get on a Zoom call. Don't rely on email and text. So much information and so much can be lost and misconstrued in text communications. And then organization, when you're working with them, you get a sense that they have their shit together. Are they, do they have a method to their madness? For instance, I use project numbers for my clients, and that project number is the 3 first letters is their letter project code. Like for AEG, it's AEG, and then project 001 and 213 and so on. Things like that. Are you getting a sense of organization from them? And then lastly, how do they take feedback? Working on games is an iterative process. There's bound to be conflicts in terms of what is offered versus what the client wants. And if they can take direction well and not take it personally, then that's a check in the plus column for them. So that's kind of talking about the professionalism of the biz or the people that you're working with. Now on to the evil genius, or basically, how much their knowledge they have. And it doesn't need to be like nitty gritty design knowledge, and, they don't need to be Wikipedia. They just, how well are they representing you, or how well are they servicing you with the knowledge that they have? And knowledge can be I see knowledge as like a double-sided coin. On one side, you have the innate knowledge of, just the gut feeling of good designers are good designers before they get schooled. They have a good sense of composition. They have a good sense of color. They have a good sense of whatever. And then once they get that learning and all of the education, whether it's through a formal institution or like me, self-taught. And self-taught doesn't really mean I taught myself. It's I learned from many different sources. And then how do they take that technical ability? How do they apply that to their technical ability? It's important, but you really, that technical ability and the way that they use, say, Adobe Creative Suite or whatever is important. Don't get me wrong, but unless they have a good base to build that off of, a lot of the times you're not going to be, getting the best out of somebody. Here's a lot of the different kind of skills that I was talking about: typography, color theory, page layout. That's very important when it comes to information communication. User experience, another big thing. Why did you place stuff here versus there? Why are you using, this color text versus that color text? Branding, then all the kind of the mathy and the hard stuff, the hard skills stuff, which is like the pre-press. I've seen it before. A lot of, digital and designers with no print experience print their first game and are surprised by some of the issues that arise at the printer. So demonstrating that kind of technical ability is really important. Math, man, I never really understood how much math there was in working on games, but stuff like when it comes to maximizing the bits on a punch board with a certain amount of gutter space in between them, component sizes, how big your boxes can be, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so that kind of wraps up the evil genius, or the shit that people know. Passionate one. As designers, we are passionate people. We we really kind of, it's at the core. And passion can be a really good thing. It can also be a not really great thing. Passion is what drives me at 3 a.m. to finish a project because I'm really in the zone and it's great, it's awesome. And I pull an all-nighter to work on something, and by the morning, I'm super happy with it. Passion's also got me going on that same kind of train, but I'm spending 5 hours working on an Instagram post about my dog, whether when I really should be working on paying work. So sometimes it can work against you, and I think the important thing here is how well do they put that passion to work for them. So passion's also a really good kind of indicator of, do they give a shit? I mean, really, do they give a crap about what you're doing? Are they just phoning it in, or are they bringing their A game? On every job I work on, I try and establish a sense of ownership on the project. And what that does for me is it makes me push myself further. I take a sense of pride in what I'm working on. I defend any detractors of the work that I believe in with more conviction. And in the end, it just makes a better product. And what ownership means to me is that I've got skin in the game. I'm more likely to be an ambassador for your project and your product and your company when I'm out in the wild than if I was just like phoning it in and taking a paycheck on something. Give you an example. Like if I'm out in the wild and I see a brand that I worked on, like I did the Origins. If I'm at Origins and I see the logo being treated poorly, but it was done by a third-party process, or third-party, like someone's magazine or an ad, I'll reach out to my client and say, hey, did you see that this was done with your logo? Because I am now I have skin in the game. I want to make sure that I take steps to correct whatever needs to be done to correct it. So that's what passion can do for you. And then the last kind of X factor we're talking is like the wonderkind. What do you provide, or what can be provided to you to really kind of push that designer up to the next level, to really connect with you on a personal level, to help build that relationship with you. And that can look like a lot of different things. Do they deliver? Simply put, do they deliver? And do they give you what you want, what they promised you, when they promised you, for how much they promised you? Or are they coming in over budget, over time, and with a substandard product? When designers do things like take ownership, over delivering on things, on other unexpected little things like delivering early, or giving you 4 or 5 concepts instead of the 2 that were in the contract, whatever it is. These little things really help establish don't kill yourself as a designer. Sometimes going that extra mile isn't worth it, but yeah, that's a personal call. But every single time that I've done it, it's been driven from inside of me, and I've never been sorry about it. So, because I think in the end, it makes a better product. So getting close to the end here, I'm going to talk about some successes that I've had. And this is going to look like a little bit of an AEG case study, because all 3 of these games I'm going to talk about are AEG games. This is Thunderstone Quest. This is the first big game. It's like paradigm shifting in size wise game that I worked on. Dozens of boards, 300 plus cards, 3 different versions of the game offered on Kickstarter, the Kickstarter page as well. It was huge. It was massive. But it really, actually, one thing that this game did for me in terms of game graphic design and working on games is it forced me to develop processes. Because there was so much to do, I still use processes that I developed working on this game. Here's Tiny Towns. We were talking about that earlier, just before we started. Love this game, not just because it won Game of the Year at Origins this year, but I love the visuals. It's so bright. It's such an approachable and easy game to play. It was just so much fun to work on. And then lastly, Mariposas came out recently in August, I believe. And this was by game designer Elizabeth Hargrave. She came, her debut game was Wingspan by Stonemaier. And it saw huge success. And this is her follow-up, her sophomore game. And just as much realism was put into this game as was Wingspan. It's incredible the amount of stuff that is jam-packed in this game that actually have real world ties to the mechanics that you're playing in the game. So that was pretty cool, and it's just it was beautiful too. And the artwork we got was from a Mexican tattoo artist named Indy Maverick. And the challenge that we had with it was, sure, the art was beautiful, but unfortunately there just wasn't a whole lot of it. So we ended up having to kind of really put our thinking caps on, rather than do some accents for graphic design to the visuals that were done. We had to like fill in a lot of gaps, and that was that's where type selection and color palette choices and things really came into play. And the people that I was working with for that was on the AEG side was fantastic, and we really I think we really hit a home run with that one. So those are the successes. Now let's talk about a failure, some failures. First, I'm going to show you a little. This is what I think of. One of the things I think of whenever I think of design failures, and it's just, this is a commercial from the 90s or something. Anyways, let's have a look.
Hey, that's great. But who are the chefs?
Not going anywhere for a while?
Great googly moogly.
Grab a Snickers.
You spell it.
Yeah.
Oh, a little bit of a video. Okay, so let's kind of, I love that commercial. Anyways, let's go into this. Can anybody spot an error on this board? So there are two 44s, if you can't see it. Luckily, there are two sides to this board. One side goes the serpentine, so it's like right to left and left to right as you're going down the board, and that's this side. The other side, which goes left to right on every row, thankfully has the correct numbering. The second printing has already been done and fixed the error, but it's a gut punch whenever you see stuff like this. Printing errors are very unfortunate. A lot of the time, they're not cheap to fix, and if you don't have to fix them, like in this case, luckily we didn't really, the client chose not to fix it before they sent them out. Or actually, no, actually that's not true. They printed them, then discovered it. So you know, sometimes you catch them before, sometimes you catch them after they were printed but not shipped out. And that's it. It's a decision to be made, because sometimes printing errors can be in the thousands of dollars. So, and then here's just a few games I worked on. This is Fickle from Bard Games. This is Bad Maps from Floodgate, and that's, yeah. And then this, another pirate game. I think I worked on 4 pirate games in a row. This is Chrono Corsairs from TMG. This is that AEG booth I was telling you about. The 4 different skins. Bosk, Canadian graphic designer, Canadian game designers. Ecos, which is the one we had the scoreboard with. And this is another TMG game called Embark, another pirate game, or pirate-ish. And then lastly, this is Cosmic Colonies with Floodgate. Okay, well, thanks, guys. Thanks for sitting through that. Let me just stop sharing this here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
I'm going to open up to questions if anybody has any.
I got plenty, but I'll let somebody else take the stage first.
Wants to go, or do we just want Tyler to go?
Tyler's probably got all the questions.
I'll just give a quick question, because you might have also mentioned it in your introduction, but you said you started with computer programming and then you made the leap into doing this type of work, and it was a big learning curve for you to get into that. But what was really the main driver, and like how long did it take you to really feel like you were ready to start doing this type of work?
Well, I think the learning curve I was talking about mostly was being a just like marketing graphic designer and working at the museum and having to think about UX and cognitive stuff. But the reason why I know I'm not a computer programmer today is because I'm not a very good lateral thinker. I see very visually, and the driver for me, if I look back on my life, I've always taken the opportunity to go the creative route rather than the non-creative route. So I think the big driver was I'd done, I'd worked in the design and as a designer for a number of years before I reached a point where I was like, you know what, I like doing design, but I don't want to. There's only so many marketing ads you can do for brochures and things like that. And I found this really great thing called board games, and I saw an opportunity to meld the two together, and that was like a big driving force behind it.
Yeah, I know I did computer programming on my own, just self-taught, and I loved it. And then as soon as I started taking it in school, I never did it again because it was just so structured and so boring. Like they just kill you, take all the creativity out of it.
I feel the same way, and it's if I look back to my physics courses in
the baby
visitor
in college or in university. Sorry, it was I mean, there's a reason why I'm not a scientist either, because math is hard. Thanks.
I definitely had a comment that said ew, math, not my thing.
Yep, agree. Well, from time to time, trying to get better at just like remembering my mental math stuff.
The thing is, I like math a lot, but higher level math, I'm just not great at.
I had a couple
grade 11, awful. Grade 11 math, terrible.
Sort of the same thing for me as Kaelin's saying. Like I had a couple of teachers, I think, that ruined my experience. Like I know that we always say like teachers have such a profound impact, but there were literally 2 teachers that I can distinctly remember that ruined both math and art for me, like visual art. Like I've since been like, okay, maybe I'll dip my toes, but like verbatim told me like this isn't good enough, even though it's like art is subjective, and like I'm in grade 8, but you shouldn't ruin this for me right now. But you did. Anyway, I have like questions based on your experience in the tabletop industry, because I didn't introduce myself before, but I'm Tyler. I'm an alumnus from the program, so part of the pilot cohort year for game design development at Laurier. So I've been graduated out a year and a bit now. At the same time, like graduating into a pandemic is not the most beneficial, but at the same time, I would have loved to have spent this year like volunteering my time, for example, at different conventions. I was actively like participating in the stuff with Daryl and like different local events, and I would have loved to have spent my time at conventions. Like that's where I thrive, like amongst community members that can and that's part of the reason like why right now like I'm working with escape rooms. Is like I get to see the players as much as I've played like video games and stuff like that and dabbled a little bit in everything. I wondered if you might have any like advice from having like gone to places like Origins as to if you know anybody that has like sort of given tips on like how to get involved in that, or like if there's a obviously you can reach out to a company and say, hey, do you need help for this convention? That's what I've heard a couple times, but I wonder if there's like a gap in anything that you've seen that like, hey, this could be done in conventions or anything like that in a regular world, that you might have like as words of wisdom.
Sure. As such, speaking of Origins, this year was going to be my first year. I rebranded Gamma and Origins. Went to Gamma, got home. They shut the airports down, and we didn't go to Origins. So it was unfortunate because all the new rebranding stuff we didn't get to see. But
No kidding.
my first Gen Con was in 2017 for the 50th anniversary. And it's overwhelming. It's a really overwhelming experience. I actually made a decision this year to only do Gamma as far as business development wise goes. If I wanted to add to that on a personal level, just to go game and see my friends, then so be it. But like I worked at Gen Con last year with AEG at their booth, and I think the easiest way really is, if you have a relationship with Daryl at all, leverage that. There's so many companies, like I know once you get in and you do a good job, they want to keep people like that. So you'll work 10 to 6 in the hall, and they'll give you a per diem, and they'll give you to buy lunch with, and they'll give you a room to stay in. But I think it's really, a lot of it is, so the last thing you want to do is go to a convention and talk to them there about it.
Fair.
I think, and I made that mistake my first year at Gen Con. It's like they're there to sell. They're 3 and 4, the busier booths are 3 and 4 people deep at the booth. To go there and to take them away from their sales to try and sell them something, is not the best way to do it. But I found success doing it. It's just you gotta be patient if you're gonna do that, and you can't expect anything because you're on their time kind of thing. Yeah. So my advice would be, when you go to conventions like that, if you hang around people, make friends, and this whole industry is about nepotism and hooking your friends up. So if you make a friend that from Colorado that volunteers at the Renegade booth every year, and you're good friends with them on Facebook and kept in touch, they're like, hey Tyler, they're looking for people at Origins or at BGG Con, whatever. A lot of the time that's just good enough.
Right on. Yeah, no, that's super helpful. I think that definitely understanding where I can tap the resources that I do have and making new connections.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't have expected this year to have made another tabletop connection at all in reality. But now that I've heard your talk, like it's incredible to like put another face to the name and such, and see more diversified portfolios in the industry that I want to be continually involved in.
Cool.
This is why we do the game talks, guys. I like to bring in people. You get to chat with them. I met Matt because I know Daryl. So
nice.
It's just kind of how it goes. And then you end up throwing names around and people know who you're talking about. And, the game design world in Canada is pretty big, but at the same time, it's very small, especially for tabletop. Like once you know a few key players, you can end up kind of figuring out all the missing bits, and you end up knowing lots of people, and they're also friendly and helpful.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Go ahead.
To be able to fit all of the people in an industry at one convention. All of the players, and not game players, but all of the kind of a good chunk of the professionals, in a convention hall in a certain area. Pick another industry, you probably can't do that because there's way too many people to do that with.
Part of, I think, this year has like definitely just shone a light on how driven this community still is. Like I know Scott was here earlier, and I know that he was lamenting about how just obviously moving board games online for a time is all right, but long term, it's just there's such a value of sitting across the table with other people, and you're never gonna get you're never gonna be able to. I think this shows in general that you're never going to one-to-one create that online, regardless of tabletop simulator or board game arena or anything like that, tabletopia, whatever it may be. Obviously there are ways to showcase things and put a spotlight on different games, but definitely as we move towards a more positive and traditional way of like sharing these games with each other, I think that we'll see a resurgence in it because I know that as much as like I live in KW right now, just down the street from J&J's Cards, and their business is honestly doing really well from what I can tell, and as far as it goes for like customers and different people, because it's like everybody's together for so long, they're bored of TV shows, they can't go to movies, or they can go to movies but it's not a regular year for releases. So being able to bring in more people with gateway games is really important during this time, at least from what I've found.
Yeah, for sure. I played D&D once a week last night and every Wednesday night. And I've played 2-3 board games online, and I'm not a fan. I'm not. It takes that X factor away that I look to play board games. The whole reason why I play.
Is there a game this year that maybe there's a two-part question. Is there a game this year that you wanted, like you would have looked forward to playing, aside from D&D, maybe, like obviously that's a regular ongoing scheduled thing, but were there things that you were looking forward to this year, maybe at, you said Origins was like it was going to be your first time. Like what was your schedule like until such time that everything went in the crapper?
For someone who works on games 60 or 70 hours a week, I play very few of them.
Fair enough.
I stopped buying games. I just get the games that I work on. But I mean, there are a few games that I was looking forward to playing. One of them that I did work on, Cubitos, which is by John D. Clare. It's an AEG game, and it should be out later on this year or Q1 next year.
How do you spell that?
Like Cubitos.
Okay.
And that looked fun. And I played it while I went out to AEG has a design house in Orange County, California, and I was out there after PAX U in 2018, and I spent a week there working on games and stuff with them. We got to play Cubitos, which is fun. But that's one thing I'm gonna I'm assuming all you guys are game designers and not like service providers. So one thing I learned very quickly working on games is you got to play the game to do a good job working on it. If you don't, then you're going to miss stuff, and it's not going to be, it'll be apparent in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, totally. I know that like in my experience, like the tabletop game design class, like prototyping is just so. I'm sure if Scott were here as well. Like prototyping is so pivotal to, and I know that other people that maybe are like Robert I mentioned earlier. Robert I know is working on his own self-published game right now. That just seeing it through like an extended playtest process, I think that's the one thing that I've come to appreciate more out of graduation, is that in school you have maybe not less time, but a different schedule for playtesting, and outside of that, active extended playtesting is so valuable. Just having played Robert's game like over the course of 6 to 8 months rather than in a span of 2 to 4 weeks for a class. Obviously you have the design then, and you can make many rapid prototypes, but I'm loving the value of being able to play test the stuff that I can see
Absolutely.
from concept through to fruition in some form.
And it's funny because I could get a prototype from a company, initial talks of working on it. They'll send it to me. It'll just be like, for instance, you know, this is what Merchants of the Dark Road looks like from, you know, in prototype form, which is a lot better than a lot of the prototypes that I've seen. But I could get it in January one year, and then they'll shelve it, and then I'll get another prototype of it in August, and it's a completely different game.
Mm-hmm.
So that, you know, that doesn't go lost upon me. I mean, sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes the mechanics just get in the way to the point where it's a hard stop, and it's not, you have to, you know, throw it out and start again, or throw that mechanic out and start again, or whatever it is. But I can't help but think that the addition of someone like me in the process to help, say it was a user experience issue that they were having problems with their playtesters, you know, someone with UX knowledge to help try and maybe solve that might not cause them to have to go all the way back to the drawing board.
Yeah, totally. I took up as many courses as I possibly could before the program even existed at Laurier for user experience design, and I would have minored in it if I could have by graduation, but definitely the value of just how to communicate a product to somebody and how to make it visually clear, and you know, where do our eyes go first and where do our hands go first, and there's such a connect there about like the not hand-eye coordination per se, but how we interact with the pieces like in a certain order and stuff. There's definite value in how that is conducted for sure. I think that's all the questions that I have. I don't know if I'm definitely just sort of rambling over here about how great tabletop games are and how much potential I think there is for them, but that's just me.
Okay.
I want to ask a question. So in the last 3 years or so, you've kind of been ramping up to get to the point where you are now. You've got people working under you. Is there ever any opportunities for a young game design student who may want to take part or to see what you're up to, or, you know, to internship? Are you at that capacity yet? Like, not to put you on the spot, but I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are, if anyone was in.
If they want to intern in a non-game design capacity, sure. I mean, as far as game design goes, I think that's certainly part of what we do, but in the form of workshopping and feedback with the designer themselves or the developer. So I'm not sure there's a specific opportunity for that type of person that I've identified quite yet. I'm intrigued by it though. So maybe.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because going into game design, I know when I went into school, I kind of knew what I liked, but I didn't know where I was going to end up. So to have different options, which is why we're so lucky to have you here, you know, you can be the designer, you can do the graphics, you can do art, you can do so many different components and still be in the industry.
Yeah. Well, I do have a friend of mine working or kind of interning with me right now, and he was working at an event space and got laid off because of COVID. So, but he's a very avid board gamer and he wanted to make a shift into the industry. So he's tagging along on a couple of projects just as a like auditing them kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly possibilities. I think when it comes to game design, a lot of that lead comes from the publisher versus the supplier. but that's cool though.
I want to ask one more question.
Hmm?
What is your favorite game you've worked on?
I've worked on.
And why?
I mean, it's not my favorite to play, but it's my favorite experience was Thunderstone Quest. I think one of the reasons why, because it was my first time working on something in such a large capacity. And there's a whole bunch of different types of bits in the game. It was my first time doing a lot of the different types of things, like creating a die line for the wooden meeples, doing a punch board, doing die cut stuff. And actually, no, it wasn't my first punch board, but things like that. It really, and just the sheer size of it. That's probably, but my favorite game to play is right now is Orléans, for sure.
It's an older one, right? So like
A
from,
few years old.
I know I've heard of it.
Orleans.
Right, yeah, 2014.
Yeah, love that game. I could play that every day, every week.
Mm-hmm.
Not every day, but every week. Unfortunately, my wife does not game.
Oh no.
Oh, that can be tough.
So,
Especially during a pandemic.
I could create a 5-minute game about knitting and swing dancing with cats in it, and she wouldn't play it.
Oh dang.
So I was like, I'd play that game.
I would play that game.
I would too. I just managed to get my partner's dad and brother on board with, oh man, what have I introduced them to? We started with Splendor, and that went really well, especially because her dad won the first game, so that was helpful. And
You almost gotta throw the first game.
yeah, you kind of. I'm totally not against that at all. Like I'm more than happy to let somebody, especially if I'm playing a gateway game. It's like I'm not gonna obviously hoard all the chips for Splendor. It's just not worth it for their and my enjoyment. And Dominion and the Crew Quest for Planet 9 is one that's really good right now, because anybody who family gatherings, that's its own separate topic, but for traditional family gatherings, they play a lot of like gin rummy and euchre, so trick taking games is right up their alley. So they're like, after we played one mission off of the Crew, they were like, oh, you can bring that one back, we can definitely play that again. I was like, okay, great, I got them hooked. The Crew is where it's at, so I'm gonna keep bringing games. So
there you go. Yeah, it's
I'd also like to just comment that I appreciate the work that goes into the design aspects of color blindness, because there's so many games that I've struggled with just components where they use a very muted colors, and it's so hard to tell the difference between them. So really bold colors and symbols really makes a difference for me.
Yeah, thanks. It is. I mean, like it's kind of become a personal thing for me over the last decade or so. My mom has slowly lost her vision over the last 10 or 12 years from macular degeneration, and just seeing, what that effect has on her, and then being very, very mindful of it working at the museum, in addition to color blindness and actual completely blind people and so on and so forth. There's you have stuff like what doesn't really apply to board games, but people in wheelchairs and things like that too. So I actually looked into, not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I looked into some accreditation programs around that I could take to get an accessibility certification, so that I could apply that and offer it as a service for auditing and whatnot to games. So
But we have seen also in game design recently in the components, like people in wheelchairs or like people with walkers or whatever. So they are changing the meeples and some of the plastic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
To reflect accessibility and that sort of thing. So it
One of
is
the
changing in the components as well.
absolutely, there's representation absolutely is changing, which is fantastic. One of the games I worked on for Floodgate's very mindful of this. They're great. They try and really get a wide kind of equal representation for several different groups of people in their games. So there's a person in a wheelchair. There's all these different different types of race and culture and everything, and they just did a game fashioned around themed around the Indian Holi festival, the festival of color, where they throw colored powder. And it's a really cool game, and Ben's a white guy from Minnesota, so he worked with we went to the local cultural cultural organization to try and get hooked up with some people that would be interested in helping contribute to the authenticity and of the game, and that's, I think that was really commendable, and it's a required step going forward for a lot of people and for everybody, really.
Yeah, I think cultural consultants are a huge part of what will be any industry standard for anything going forward, and it just allows so much more like thematics in itself. I don't want to, obviously doesn't boil down to just thematics, but I'm so done with medieval stuff. Like there's just so many games that are medieval that we can do some like Mary Poses is such a breath of fresh air about like oh man, I loved like tile games and sign me up for that, but there are some really bland themes out there, and being able to just breathe a fresh air, like a breath of fresh air into that is so important from a perspective of just like desire to play something. It's like, oh, another medieval theme, yeah, looks good.
Yeah, and even the I mean, like talking to having cultural or experts and things when you're dealing with a non-familiar or non-native culture just makes the theme so deep. It really enriches it, and then above and beyond that, or separate to that, so many of the of the way that publishers or developers are approaching just the creative or the artwork or whatever it is of a game. It's it's not necessarily going to be a digital artist painting something. It's this game I worked on with Brotherwise called Night of the Ninja. It's a here, let's see if I can find it. Actually, I'm going to share my screen again because this is really cool. So it's basically, they worked with a guy who does paper craft shadow boxes, and these are the cards.
Wow.
And I'm going to show you. It's just incredible.
Those look great.
Yeah, they're really nice. But this is going to blow your mind. Where is it? Here I go, sharing my screen again. See if I'll pull this up first. Sorry, are we over time? Is that okay, or?
It's okay if you're okay with it.
I'm fine with it. I'm going to be working till 2 a.m. anyway, so.
Oh my goodness.
That's what happens when you have 3 Kickstarters on the go.
Oh God.
Jeez. Which Kickstarters?
The Atlantis Rising Monstrosities, which launched on American Election Day.
Yeah, a lot of people are excited about that one. I know that.
Yeah, I got a triple game from Calliope Game Kickstarter going on the 10th, and then the 15th is this immersive battle maps thing for RPGs on the 15th. Okay,
cool.
Assets.
I'm getting so overwhelmed with all of the games on Kickstarter.
You gotta pick and choose. I caved and I bought Nemesis Lockdown the last day of its Game Found pledge manager because I've played Nemesis. I have the retail version of Nemesis, but that's also a game that I'm comfortable buying and then figuring, oh, I can probably make my money back on this if I hate the game. But definitely got to pick and choose with Kickstarters.
So this is one of the cards.
So cool.
Oh, wow.
That's so neat.
That is crazy.
So he just photographs them and lights them with different colors.
Wow.
That's beautiful. Oh,
Yeah.
man.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
That's such a craft.
Yeah.
Like literally, like that's an in-depth craft.
Yeah, he uses a Cricut to do the stuff.
Oh, true. Yeah.
At first I thought it was by hand. I'm like, are you nuts?
There's no way. Yeah, you
But-
can't do that
Because
precise.
he was iterating these like pretty quickly. I'm like, I'd be like, no, one and done. You're no
Mhm.
edits.
Yeah, my partner will has a Cricut and she'll do different stuff around the house for she labeled our spice jars with like different vinyl stickings and such. So that's always Cricuts are great. Cricuts are an underrated tool, I think, for the tabletop industry.
I am fighting the urge to get a resin.
You didn't mention too much about design around rule books, because that's also a big pet peeve of mine in the board game industry, is that some rule books are absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Some companies do a great job of it, but does that something you come across, or is it a totally different group that would like deal with that? Or
In what sense? Like, so there's rule books are a multi-layered. There are a lot of smart people that need to go in to make a great rule book. They need to collaborate together. The graphic designer can only do so much. You need a rule book writer, and rules writing is an art form. You have to understand how to phrase things to actually communicate the task they need to do versus just explaining it. If you can say something concisely, all the better, but it needs to be clear. So yeah, rule books are a big pet peeve of mine, working with people. And
maybe my general question then is, because I'm not part of the gaming industry, I'm more of a player. And I know Scott, and so I've been to conventions, and I live very close to the Laurier, so I've been there for some of their prototype days and stuff like that. But in the industry, is there like people that just write, that's their profession, to write a rule book, or there is people that just do that?
A buddy of mine, Jeff, do you know Jeff Fraser, Michelle?
It's not a name I know.
He was in TO for like a long time. Now he just moved back to Ottawa. So he's a writer. There's rulebook writers. Absolutely, there is. Because it's I think one of the professions, one of the flavors of writers that really translates well, forgive the pun, into rulebook writing is technical writing. So people that write manuals for instructional manuals for things you buy, or whatever it is. That's a very relatable skill to writing for rule books for games. The thing is, with games, a lot of the time you're going to have that extra, tongue-in-cheek flavor to stuff that you want to add in there to make it fun. So it's a fine balance between making it fun and overcomplicating things and no longer making things clear. But absolutely, there are people. So not only is there rules writers, but like editors. And to be an editor, you don't necessarily need to be familiar with the board games or the industry. But no matter, like I said earlier, no matter what you do with a game, it helps to play the game. So that if you're a rule book writer and you're looking at a certain process that you're talking about how to do, from real world experience playing the game how it's supposed to go. Yeah, so definitely there is.
Well, I was just curious because
Yeah,
I've commented on a number of rule books on Board Game Geek and stuff like that, and now people have asked me to start reviewing their rules for them and that sort of
fantastic.
thing. But I didn't know if you can actually get paid for that or not.
Absolutely.
It's a well-needed role.
If pardon me?
It's a well-needed role to review rule books.
Oh yes, yeah. One of the biggest things for rule books though is blind playtesting. You can get a rule book that you're confident is fine to send off to the printer, send it to somebody to blind playtest it, and they'll decimate it.
Yeah.
I had this, I was volunteering for the Canadian board game competition thing where they were putting all these games out and around Canada to have people play and vote for them. And I got this one that was this gold rush, panning for gold type of game. Some of the worst rules I've ever read. I felt so bad for the person because I bet the game was fun, but we spent a good hour trying to figure out how to play the darn thing. So
is it Gold West?
I can't remember. They had dice in a pan and you'd shake it around.
Oh,
and
okay.
then no. I can't remember what exactly it was called, but it was yeah.
The problem with the board game industry, one of the problems with the board game industry is that because it's such a hobby adjacent industry, the barriers to entry, like so many, just in Hollywood, the script writers, everybody has a script that they want to promote, or everybody has a game design they want to promote, and things like that. So a lot of the smaller publishers that you're going to come across are basically those people who have seen some success and have parlayed that into doing more games. So a lot of the time they're gonna just rely on their own skills because it worked last time. So one of the things that I'm trying to do as a service provider is try and separate that and elevate the expectations of what these publishers really should be expecting from their service providers. Because one of the worst things in the world, and I hope I don't surprise anybody here, but is Fiverr. Going to Fiverr to buy services is such a bad thing for the industry. You're lowering the bar of what people should be expecting, and I don't care that people are taking money out of my pocket, because they're really not. I'm not competing with those people. I'm trying to elevate the expectations of what these publishers should be, because they'll go to print, they'll go to press. Some publishers will go to press. We're like, oh no, it's fine, and you don't really realize, sure, it may be serviceable and fine, but what if I show you the difference of what a professional writer could do, or what a professional illustrator or artist or graphic designer or whatever it is, or even game designer? You look at some people that have had great success or some success for a game they kickstarted, then you get a professional game designer like Sen take a look at it, or Daryl, and they can take it and elevate that. There's a guy I know, John Brieger. That's all he does. His company develops games, and they'll work with you to develop your game, bring it from here to here. So I think the industry really could use some more education as to what professional services or people at a professional level can offer, and what that means for their products.
Definitely.
It's nice that it's such an approachable field, because like you said, anyone can make a game. We can do something, but to have someone who really has knowledge, skills, and bringing in a team, I think is highly valued as well. You might get that one-off game that's amazing that someone just kind of cooked up in their backyard or whatever, but at the same time, I think professionalizing it is good, and that's good for you guys. Sorry guys, I have a cold. But it's good for you folks that are looking to get into game design, because you want, to be able to say, hey, I have this degree, I have this understanding, this is what I can bring to the field, this is what I can bring to what you're trying to do. And when you guys are approaching people that want games designed and things like that.
Yeah. Yep, it's very true.
How we all feeling? It's 8:30.
Good.
Oh, it was very good. I enjoyed it very much.
Totally. Yeah. Really appreciate the time.
I didn't want to like
So
cut
much
questions. I was just asking.
No.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Thanks, everybody.
yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you for coming.
If they want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
You can find me on Facebook or mattpaquette.com. You can reach to me through there. That's about it, I think.
Cool. Well, I would officially like to thank you so much for coming. And thank you guys for sticking around. I think this is a great discussion, and I'm glad we recorded it so we can post this up soon. I just kind of wanted to go over a couple little housekeeping things about GAMEtalk. So as you know, next semester is also online. So we are doing virtual GAMEtalks. We've moved, as you can tell, from doing one every month to doing 2 a semester. I hope that's going well. People are liking that format. Don't want to overwhelm you with stuff. But we have our 2 speakers lined up for next semester, and I can officially tell you, because I just got permission to do that. So we have Sarah Grimes, who is a professor at University of Toronto, and she looks at play, and she looks at the toy industry as well as the game industry, and how things are gendered towards children, and what that does.
Cool.
What the ramifications of that might be. And I've gone to her talks before, and she's really interesting, really cool stuff. And then we also have Sam Meggs is coming. So she's going to talk about her work as a game writer, as well as the publications that she's written. She's written a few books. And I think I'm really excited to have her come and talk to you guys too. And those will be in February and March. And obviously I will communicate and send things out. But thanks again. And Scott's not here, so I'll take his part. Thank you so much. This is a partnership with Library and Game Design, and we're so glad that we're able to do this for you guys. And if you ever have any suggestions of who you'd like to come, send me an email. Thanks so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Waiting for that red light.